and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, the man who is excellent in a pub quiz as long as the topic is 80s music, the 80s mixtaper. How's everyone doing? Are we ready for some more Friday fun? We've had a bump of new followers on social media in the past few weeks, with about 600 new followers. So if you are new to the pod, basically just over a decade ago, May 2016, I challenged myself to try and listen to every single charting entry in the UK charts from the 31st of December 1979 to the 31st of December 1989. Why? Probably a really minor midlife crisis, but what revealed itself was an incredible adventure which ended finally around 2021 when COVID sped up my listening habits, and after a lot of Phil Collins, Whitney Houston and many more, literally thousands of singles, I'd done it. This podcast is the story of that journey and the thousands of tunes which made the decade so great. Each week, we inch the calendar slightly forward and listen and talk about the songs, the bands, the makeups, the breakups, and the incredible anecdotes which now exist. Just before we get into the episode proper, if you're enjoying the pod and want to help support its upkeep, I do have a Buy Me a Coffee link in the episode description. If you can see a way to buy me a coffee, please, it would be greatly appreciated. This podcast is entirely free, but it does still cost me about £90 a year for the platform and storage. I don't want to resort to a subscription model, but do remember you're already getting 88 episodes and a whole lot more to come. So if you can chip in a fiver, please, it would really help right now. And if you do, I will happily roast your name on the pod by dropping you into an 80s band that I think is appropriate. I'm sure someone listens to this, as my platform keeps telling me I've had over 16,000 listens. So if you can chip in, please, that would really help me out. Also, if you can tickle the subscribe button and leave a review on your pod platform of choice, it all helps. So today we finally, after a really packed June, break into July 1982. Coming up, we explain the cultural phenomenon that was fame, that got all our mums and brothers and sisters going to dance school. Bananarama break away from Funboy 3. AC/DC released their stadium closer. We then dig deep into our childhoods with a single from a much beloved stop frame animation character. We have our one and only meeting with the Tygers of Pan Tang. We get angry on the tennis court with Chalkdust. And we end rolling about in lovely money, courtesy of the Damned. As always, we can't play the songs in the pod due to our copyright laws, but if you go to the episode description, you will find hyperlink playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music, which will take you straight to the tunes. So if you don't mind flitting between the pod and the music, it all works pretty well. Anyway, let's get back to the music. We start today, playlist 44, by taking a step back 2 years. Think about the year 1980. Think about what it meant to want to be seen. Before the internet turned visibility into a globalised, democratic and perhaps messy utility. Before anyone could broadcast their entire life from a smartphone. Stardom was a distant fortress. You had to knock on the doors, or more accurately, you had to sweat through the auditions. Enter Alan Parker's film, Fame. This was not a glossy, sanitised Hollywood musical. It was a gritty, high-energy chronicle of students at the New York City High School for Performing Arts. It was about rejection, ambition, and the sheer physical cost of wanting to live forever. At the centre of this universe stood 19-year-old powerhouse Irene Cara. She played Coco Hernandez, a fiercely driven student who desperately wanted to make it. But Cara didn't just act in the movie, she delivered its manifesto. When the title track drops, it isn't just a pop song, it is a declaration of war against obscurity. It is a pulsing fusion of rock guitars, disco-adjacent bass lines, and synthesizers that capture the exact moment the 70s collided with the 1980s. Let's cue the music. If you're an influencer, this should be your fight song. This is Irene Cara with Fame. Track 1, playlist 44. I say fight song for the influencers. Of course, really, that is the anthem for anyone who wanted to dance in the 80s. Good knows how many mums and daughters, and sometimes sons, it convinced into donning spandex, headbands and leg warmers. It did for my mum and my sister. For my mum especially, it brought a brand new social life and confidence to a woman who had just moved to a new town and who, through ballet, tap and modern classes, met a group of like-minded mums who would go on to dance and drink copious amounts of coffee afterwards and build close friendships and bonds which exist 44 years later. Long live all those remarkable women. Let's look at how the track was painstakingly built. The music was composed by Michael Gore. The lyrics were written by Dean Pitchford. The creation of the track was anything but casual. According to every UK number one, it took the duo an entire month of intense work to complete the theme. The inspiration for the central hook came from Pitchford's own teenage past. He had competed in speech tournaments and frequently recited a speech about Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. The piece dealt with the gift a poet receives to live through ever through their creative work despite not having a long life. When Michael Gore played the chord progression for the chorus, Pitchford instantly connected it to that sentiment and the phrase spontaneously emerged, "Fame, I'm gonna live forever." Gore recognised the power of the line immediately and insisted they write it down before they lost the magic. The recording session itself featured massive musical talent. A young session vocalist named Luther Vandross was brought into the studio. We'll definitely be hearing more from him later. It was Vandross who improvised the iconic trailing "Remember, Remember, Remember" vocal arrangement that follows the main chorus lines. He sang background parts alongside a large ensemble of vocalists, including pop singer Vicky Sue Robinson. The fire electric guitar solo that pierces through the synthesizers was executed by legendary session player Elliot Randall. Originally, Irene Cara was hired for the film, but when producers David De Silva and Alan Marshall, along with screenwriter Christopher Gore, heard her voice, they completely rewrote the character of Coco Hernandez to leverage her vocal gifts. Fame became her official debut single as a commercial recording artist. The song's cultural trajectory was highly unusual because it conquered the world in two distinct waves on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean. In the US, the single was released in May 1980. It steadily climbed the charts, peaking at number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and spending a week at number 1 on the Billboard Dance chart. The song won the Academy Award for Best Original Song and a Golden Globe in 1980. Across the Atlantic, the United Kingdom completely missed the track during its initial 1980 run. It failed to chart upon its original release. However, everything changed in 1982 when the famed spin-off television series debuted on British television screens. Although Cara declined to star in the TV series, her original movie theme was retained as the opening credits track. The TV show sparked absolute mania in Britain. RSO Records quickly re-promoted Cara's original version. On July the 17th, 1982, Fame officially hit number 1 on the UK singles chart, remaining at the top spot for 3 consecutive weeks. It went on to become the 3rd best-selling single of the year in the UK. This chart dominance triggered a massive fitness and dance phenomenon. The visual language of the film and TV show, defined by raw rehearsal spaces and street dancing, convinced the public that dance was accessible. It motivated adults and their progeny to flood local dance studios. Across the US and the UK, enrolment surged for classes. Women and girls who had never set foot in a studio began buying leotards. The street-style uniform of the high school students became mainstream fashion. Suddenly, retailers were selling out of leg warmers, sweatbands, leotards, and oversized off-the-shoulder sweatshirts to everyday citizens who just wanted to experience a slice of the dream. Fame proved that a pop song paired with raw ambition could turn the sidewalk into a stage and transform ordinary exercise into a pursuit of immortality. For our track 2, we're back with the Nanas. The last time we encountered the London pop trio Bananarama, they were sharing a crowded microphone with Terry Hall, Neville Staple and Linval Golding. It was earlier in 1982 and their single was a cover of the Velvelettes' Really Saying Something, episode 39.5. That track followed a previous collaboration on Funboy 3's own hit, It Ain't What You Do, It's the Way That You Do It, episode 36.5 for those who are counting. Together, the two trios formed a brief, inescapable pop alliance. They occupied the upper tier of the UK singles chart and mimed alongside each other on top of the pops. It was an incredibly successful launchpad. However, a pop group cannot live forever in the shadow of their mentors. To establish an enduring legacy, Sarah Darling, Karen Woodward and Siobhan Fahey needed to step out on their own. They had to drop the metaphorical baby reins of Funboy 3 and navigate the music industry purely on their own terms. They needed a signature track to prove their independence. What they found was a demo that originally carried a completely different title, a fresh production team and their own identity. This is Shy Boy. Press play now. God, it really feels like you're getting into the 80s as soon as you hear Shy Boy by Bananarama. We return to June 1982. Bananarama released their next major single, Shy Boy. The song would become a defining moment for the trio, but its path to completion was filled with friction. The track was written and produced by the hit-making duo Steve Jolly and Tony Swain. Before teaming up with Bananarama, Jolly and Swain had famously produced the top 5 disco funk hit Body Talk for Imagination. When they first presented their new demo to the group, the song was titled Big Red Motorbike. According to the sleeve notes of Bananarama's 1988 The Greatest Hit collection, which I owned, incidentally, the trio disliked the lyrics. They insisted on changing the central theme to a retro-inspired narrative about an ideal, introverted lover, resulting in the title Shy Boy. This first studio collaboration marked the beginning of a long, highly successful creative partnership. However, according to historical accounts, the initial dynamic in the studio was strained. Siobhan later reflected on the sessions, explaining that the production duo initially wanted them to strictly perform songs written by the producers rather than their own material. Fahey stated that Jolly and Swain wanted a modernised 1980s variation of a classic girl group, treating Bananarama as disembodied voices rather than artists with independent ideas. In addition, the band recalled that when their high-spirited behaviour in the studio became overwhelming, the producers would occasionally send them home like naughty schoolgirls. Despite the tension, the formula worked perfectly on a commercial level. Released in the summer of 1982 on London Records, Shy Boy quickly ascended the charts, peaking at number 4. This success solidified a streak of 3 consecutive top 5 hits for the band. The single achieved international breakthrough status, reaching number 2 in Australia and breaking into the top 10 in Canada and New Zealand. In the United States, it was retitled Shy Boy, Don't It Make You Feel Good and reached number 83 on the Hot 100, marking their very first entry on that chart. The success of the single completely stripped the group of their anonymity. Members recalled that after the record became a massive hit, they were recognised by the public constantly. The visual presentation of the era further defined their public image. The physical single's sleeve artwork featured the trio standing alongside stylised visual motifs. The accompanying music video was directed by prominent new wave figures Midge and Chris Cross of Ultravox. The video's narrative featured the group transforming a nerdy office employee into a confident, leather-clad character. To cast the leading role, Sarah Darling brought in her boyfriend at the time, Terry Sharp, the lead singer of the Northern Irish rock band The Adventures. Shy Boy was eventually compiled onto Bananarama's 1983 debut studio album, Deep Sea Skiving. It effectively proved that the group could capture global pop charts entirely on their own merits. For track 3, we are back with those titans of rock and roll, AC/DC. And it's been a while, episode 13.5 to be precise. When we last left AC/DC, it was 1980 and they were standing on top of a mountain built entirely from grief and black vinyl. The band had just released Back in Black, a monolithic tribute to their late singer Bon Scott. Anchored by the unstoppable swing of You Shook Me All Night Long, They conquered global radio and proved they could survive the impossible, introducing Geordie singer Bryan into the mix. But how do you follow up an album that goes on to sell tens of millions of copies and features one of the greatest songs and riffs ever in the history of ever? How do you respond when you are suddenly the biggest, loudest band on earth? The answer involves an uncompromising South African producer, a grueling studio exile in France, a literary callback to Roman gladiators, and the literal sound of military artillery. This is the story of a rock and roll coronation disguised as an execution. Next up, here is the title track to AC/DC's 8th studio album, For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. This is one of my personal favourite song introductions. Press play now. It's a year earlier, July 1981. The members of AC/DC had just enjoyed an extended break. Flush with cash from the massive success of Back in Black, they reconvened at EMI's paved Marconi Studios in Paris to work again with producer Robert John Mutt Langer. Langer was a notorious perfectionist. If Back in Black was recorded with a sense of urgent lightning, the sessions for Those About to Rock were an agonising war of attrition. Langer dragged the band across locations trying to capture a specific acoustic environment. According to engineer Mark Durnley, the production team spent the first 3 days in Paris focused entirely on tuning the snare drum sound. The meticulousness drove the Young brothers crazy. Malcolm Young later expressed frustration with the tedious process, stating that the record took forever to make and lacked a natural flow. He noted that while there were good riffs, the title track was the only song on the album the band truly liked. But what a title track it was. The origin of the song started simply, with Angus and Malcolm Young working out a chord progression and a little guitar thing for the introduction. When they reached the chorus, they struggled to find the right words. Angus recalled a book he had read by the British classicist and poet Robert Graves regarding ancient Roman history. The phrase that caught his attention was the traditional salute uttered by gladiators to the emperor before fighting in the Colosseum. Ave Caesar, moriture te salutant, meaning, Hail Caesar, those who are about to die salute you. Angus swapped out die for rock, and a stadium anthem was born. The final legendary ingredient arrived purely by accident on July the 29th, 1981. While the band was working in a Paris rehearsal space, the televised royal wedding of Prince Charles and Princess Diana was broadcasting on a TV in the next room. The wedding celebration included thunderous cannon shots. The explosive booms drifted into the rehearsal room. Angus stopped and realised the sheer power of the sound. Because the mobile recording truck assigned to the album was fully booked that week recording Peter Gabriel, the production team went out and professionally captured actual cannons later that month. The resulting track became literal audio dynamite in dynamics, utilising a stop-start guitar hook praised by Rolling Stone reviewer David Fricke for its unique grip. The record was released in late November 1981, driven by the monumental title track, For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. It made history, becoming the first AC/DC album to hit number 1 on the US Billboard chart, holding the top spot for 3 weeks. The Cannons quickly moved from the studio straight onto the stage. The band originally commissioned custom props from light and sound design that suffered from reliability issues, leading them to deploy a stage rig featuring 2 rows of 6 black boxes per side that lifted into place to reveal the hidden barrels. Because the sheer visual spectacle and ear-splitting volume of the artillery fire made it impossible for any other song to follow, the track permanently became AC/DC's definitive concert closer. It was the ultimate salute to their fans, delivered with maximum explosive force. For track 4, we dial down the noise and return to a true childhood state. At this point in the story of the 80s, I was a petulant 3-year-old. Goodness knows how my parents put up with me. and we'd recently moved to Kent. But on the telly was a swathe of programmes which would soothe the savage beast. Over the Engine, Cockleshell Bay, Bagpuss, Mr. Ben, King Rollo, Trumpton, even Bod was still around. And then a new animation appeared for the young kids, one that still gets played today. While the charts are dominated by the synth-pop sleekness of Human League, the soulful hooks of Dexy's Midnight Runners and the smooth pop-rock swagger of ABC, if you were a child or a parent of a child in the United Kingdom during the summer of 1982, your ears were captured by something completely different. It was an acoustic-driven, delightfully bouncy piece of folk pop that told the story of a man, his vehicle, and his feline companion called Jess. It was a song that defied the cold digital textures of the early 80s charts and offered pure, unfiltered pastoral comfort. It did not have a music video on MTV, but it had a bright red stop-motion van, a woman called Granny Dryden, and a handyman called Ted. This, of course, is Postman Pat by Bryan, Daly and Ken Berry. Let it transport you back to a simpler time. You see, on this pod, we can easily go from AC/DC to Postman Pat in one song. That's how I roll, folks. Well, it began its life as the opening title music for a preschool children's television programme. It eventually took on a life of its own in the broader British pop cultural landscape. Released as a commercial single with the Handyman song on the flip side, this unassuming track managed to climb all the way to number 44 on the UK singles chart in July 1982, so not quite a top 40 entry. But why a single in the 1982 pop charts? Well, you have to look at the phenomenal success of the animation series itself. Postman Pat first broadcast on the BBC in 1981. The stop-motion series was created by John Cunliffe, a former teacher who drew inspiration from his life in rural Cumbria to construct the fictional peaceful village of Greendale. Directed by the legendary animator Ivor Wood for Woodland Animations, the show became an instant roaring success. The series was exported globally, becoming a staple of childhood across the world after being translated into numerous languages including Hebrew, Japanese, Polish and Spanish. The song's identity and soul belongs to Bryan Daly. What many pop fans didn't realise at the time was that Daly wasn't just a children's writer. He was actually one of the most sought after session musician guitar players of the 60s and 70s. He was a first call studio musician for iconic figures like Burt Bacharach, and his guitar work graced countless classic hit recordings that remained radio staples for decades. When he pivoted to recording television scores for Woodland Animations, including later hits like Gran and Bertha, remember those? He brought that seasoned professional musicality with him. The original recording of the theme tune reflects Daly's background. It is built primarily around a warm acoustic guitar, a melody and rhythm which literally feels like a post van pootling round the British countryside, and a clean, intimate vocal delivery. The man delivering those vocals was Ken Barry, born Leslie Hulme. Barry was an incredibly versatile English voice actor and singer who also narrated the original episodes and voiced a massive portion of the Greendale community, including Ted Glenn, Arthur Selby and Reverend Timms. When Post Music packaged these tracks into a full-length commercial release, Daly wrote, produced and directed the album, titled Songs and Music from the Television Series, which hit the shelves in 1982. The commercial single version of the theme was slightly different from what viewers heard on the television. It was an extended, longer version of the TV cut. The tune became so deeply embedded in the British consciousness that it became a recurring request on BBC Radio 2, proving that its appeal stretched far beyond its target preschool audience, or precisely because on Radio 2 it had a captive audience, mums, dads and grandparents with their kids. Daly's composition caught the quiet, optimistic spirit of rural Britain in a way that comforted and entertained during a turbulent economic decade. But let's not look at this one too deeply. Sometimes good storytelling, colourful characters, and a catchy theme tune is all you need. For track 5, we meet a band with the coolest name of the decade, perhaps ever, but certainly in the history of metal. 1982 was a strange transitional twilight zone for heavy metal. The initial explosion of the new wave of British heavy metal is beginning to cool down. Bands are looking at the charts, looking across the Atlantic and realising that raw speed and distortion might get you into a sweaty club, but a huge chorus gets you on the radio. Stand up, Iron Maiden. This brings us to the band with a wild name from Whitley Bay, the Tygers of Pan Tang. They had the leather, they had the ferocious riffs, and they had a name pulled from Michael Moorcock's fantasy novels. But by 1982 they also had a major label, MCA Records, whispering in their ears about hits. They find that hit, or at least they try to, in an unlikely place. It's a song called Rendezvous. It features a chorus tailored for large arenas. It sounds almost nothing like the band that wrote Susie Smiled 2 years earlier. This is the sound of a heavy metal band trying to survive the decade by evolving into a melodic rock powerhouse. Press play now. Let's start where all good stuff starts and go back to where the Tygers began. The band formed in 1978 in Whitley Bay, England. For those not in the know, Whitley Bay is a little seaside town north of Newcastle. Perfectly charming, and on a summer's day actually quite nice, but chilly as hell in winter. Not a location which screams a crucible of metal. The original lineup consisted of Jess Cox on vocals, Rob Weir on guitar, Richard Rocky Laws on bass, and Bryan Dick on drums. They quickly became a vital pillar of the new wave of British heavy metal movement. Their debut album Wildcat dropped in 1980 via MCA Records and smashed into the UK charts at number 18. It was raw, unpolished, punk-adjacent heavy metal. However, changes came quickly. Seeking a more versatile sound, they recruited a second guitarist, a young phenom called John Sykes. They also replaced Jess Cox with vocalist John Deverell. This updated lineup released the classic album Spellbound in 1981, which peaked at number 33, followed by Crazy Nights later that same year, peaking at number 51. By 1982, internal pressures and label demands for commercial success began to fracture the group. Just before a scheduled French tour in early 1982, John Sykes abruptly left the band to audition for Ozzy Osbourne. While Sykes did not get that specific gig, he famously moved on to Thin Lizzy and Whitesnake. To save the tour, the Tygers brought in former Penetration guitarist Fred Purser, who incredibly learned the band's entire live set in just 3 days. With Purser established as a full-time member, the band entered the studio with producer Peter Collins to record their 4th album, The Cage. MCA Records pushed heavily for external material to guarantee mainstream airplay. This strategy worked perfectly for the album's lead single, a heavy cover of Lieber and Stoller's Love Potion No. 9, which gave the band their biggest hit, peaking at number 45. For the follow-up single, the band did not write the track. Rendezvous was originally written by American songwriters Robert A. Johnson, Mark Stevens, and Brent Mayer for the US pop rock act RPM. The Tygers took this American AOR blueprint and injected it with British hard rock energy. John Deverell's vocals pivoted from a metal scream to a melodic, soulful delivery, singing lyrics about stepping out of the friend zone. I know we've been friends for such a long time. You cried on my shoulder while waiting in line. Let's make a rendezvous. Released on July the 9th, 1982 as a 7-inch vinyl single, MCA pushed the track heavily, releasing it on limited edition black, white and blue coloured vinyl. Rendezvous entered the charts, peaking at number 49 and spending 4 weeks on the UK charts. The album it anchored, The Cage, became their highest charting album release, hitting number 12 on the UK and selling over 200,000 copies. Despite this commercial peak, the creative tension over external pop songwriters and label interference broke the band apart. Shortly after the triumphant tour for The Cage, the band split for the first time. Rob Weir and Bryan Dick were forced out in a management shake-up. temporarily forming a band called Sergeant before various iterations of the Tygers reformed later in the decade. Rendezvous remains a brilliant, shiny monument to a band who may not have struck it big like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, but definitely won the award for coolest name. Next up, if you thought the episode couldn't get any more odd, let's talk about a comedy song about a very specific incident on a tennis court and a very angry American who would go on to be a Hall of Fame former tennis player. I don't remember this song at all, but I'm sure there are plenty who do. If this next song had to describe the way it would enter the charts like a tennis match, it aggressively leapt over the net, smashed its racket into the Wimbledon grass, and screamed directly into the face of the umpire. It is a time capsule of pure, unadulterated sports farce, captured in a faux hip-hop track. Enter a record credited to an entity called the Brat. The single was titled Chalkdust, The Umpire Strikes Back. It was a direct, unrelenting parody of the most polarising, electric and furious man in professional sports, John McEnroe. Let's take a listen. This is our track 6 today. We return to find out who was actually pulling the strings behind this bizarre piece of British chart history. The name on the original 7-inch vinyl said The Brat, but the title was actually a collaborative effort brought to life by a team of veteran British entertainment figures. The song itself was written by the songwriting partnership of Mo Foster and Mike Walling. Mo Foster was a legendary British session bass player, producer and composer. Over a career spanning decades, Foster played with iconic artists including Phil Collins, Jeff Beck, Gerry Rafferty and the London Symphony Orchestra. He composed hundreds of titles for production music libraries and later compiled his comedy tracks under the moniker of the fictional The R.J. Wagsmith Band on the 2003 retrospective album Make Tea Not War. Mike Walling was a highly successful British comedy actor and scriptwriter. He won the talent show The New Faces and went on to appear in major sitcoms like Brushstrokes Playing Eric, Last of the Summer Wine and My Family. His writing credits include hit series such as The British Empire and Birds of a Feather. To perform the track, Foster and Walling brought in two talented comedic actors to voice the central bickering match, Roger Kitter and Kaplan Kay. Roger Kitter voiced the Brat, the McEnroe character. Kitter was a well-known British stand-up comedian, actor and impressionist. He is best remembered for his role as Captain Alberto Bertorelli in the 7th series of the beloved BBC sitcom Hello Hello, another 80s favourite. He was also a regular performer at the London Palladium and served as the chairman of the Entertainment Artists Benevolent Fund. Kaplan Kay voiced the posh, exasperated umpire and served as the track's co-producer. Kay was a versatile child star turned stage and screen actor, musician and songwriter. The son of entertainer Davy Kay, Kaplan trained at the Corona Stage Academy and had a long list of acting credits from The Saint to Z-Cars. He also won a British Academy of Songwriters, Composers and Authors Award in 1994. There is obviously another character in this story, the very tennis player they were sending up. For that, we have to look back at the historic summer of 1981 at the All England club, Wimbledon. John McEnroe was a genius on the tennis court, possessing an obsessive precision for the game's geometry. He would go on to win 7 Grand Slam singles titles throughout his illustrious career and is now an incredibly gifted analyst during broadcasts and a fantastic ambassador for the sport. However, at the time, his genius was inextricably bound to a volcanic temper that the polite, traditionalist British press absolutely loved to hate, famously dubbing him Super Brat. On the 22nd of June 1981, during a first-round Wimbledon match against Tom Gulkison on Court 1, the hallowed lawns witnessed the meltdown to end all meltdowns. Chair umpire Edward James ruled one of McEnroe's serves out. Well, McEnroe erupted, walking towards the chair and screaming the lines that would instantly embed themselves into global pop culture history. You cannot be serious, man. You cannot be serious. That ball was on the line. Chalk flew up. It was clearly in. He didn't stop there. He openly called the official an incompetent fool and declared the officiating crew the absolute pits of the world. The umpire penalised him a point and tournament officials fined him $1,500. A lot of money back then. Despite the chaos, McEnroe composed himself enough to march through the bracket and defeat his ultimate rival, Bjorn Borg, in the final, ending Borg's historic 5-year Wimbledon dominance to claim his first Wimbledon title. Angered by his behaviour, the All England club broke tradition by refusing to award McEnroe an honorary club membership that year. Released on the Hansa record label to coincide with the 1982 Wimbledon tournament, Chalkdust, the umpire strikes back, turned this raw sports drama into a rap-like comedy sketch. The track features a relentless back and forth beat where Roger Kitter yells lines like "the ball is in, everyone could see that the ball's in," Chalkdust, while Kaplan K's polite umpire handles him with extreme British reserve before jokingly shooting him dead at the song's climax. The British public devoured it. The single entered the UK singles chart on the 10th of July 1982, ultimately peaking at number 19 and spending 8 weeks on the chart. It proved to be an even bigger smash across continental Europe, hitting number 3 in the Netherlands and reaching number 1 in Belgium. While spittle-drenched invective wasn't new in the charts at this point, see Punk for further reference, no one had done it about the plume of dust seen when the ball hits the line, and they probably never will again. We end today by introducing a band we've already introduced a fortnight ago, kinda sorta. A fortnight ago we met Captain Sensible with perhaps the most astonishing number 1 of the decade, Happy Talk. But while he flew solo, he was still in another band. Let's properly meet them now. It's July 1982. The UK is adjusting to the aftermath of the Falklands War. Nationalism is surging and the music charts are being conquered by the glitzy synthetic sheen of new romantic pop. Meanwhile, a group of London punk veterans are sitting in a recording studio, deliberately plotting a musical curveball that would confuse their purist fans and mock the changing culture around them. They were a band that had spent 6 years being dismissed as a chaotic joke, yet they consistently beat everyone else to the finishing line. They were the first British punk band to release a single, the first to put out a full-length album, and the first across the Atlantic to tour the US. They had split up, reformed, shifted genres, and outlasted all of their 1976 contemporaries. The song we're looking at today is a bizarre synth-driven, satirical take on capitalism. It features a relentless alt-disco electronic drum beat, a heavy bass line, and the deadpan drone of the lead singer. It is a track designed to lampoon the commercialisation of London tourism, the greed of the era, and the political absurdity of the early 80s. Greed is Good hadn't quite yet arrived, but my goodness, this band captured it ahead of time. This is the story of a standalone single that missed the top 40 charts, but perfectly captured a band refusing to be pigeonholed. This is Lovely Money by The Damned, our final song today. To fully grasp how a band rooted in the aggressive high-speed guitar assault of 1976 ended up releasing an electronic disco satire 6 years later, we have to look at the remarkable, chaotic biography of The Damned. The group officially formed in London in 1976, bringing together a volatile mix of distinct personalities. Dave Vanian, born David Lett, a former gravedigger with a deep baritone voice and a theatrical affection for vampire style. Brian James, born Brian Robertson, a dedicated fast-playing guitarist and the primary songwriter of their earliest material. Captain Sensible, born Raymond Burns, an eccentric bassist who later switched to lead guitar. Rat Scabies, born Chris Miller, a manic hyper-energetic drummer who provided the band's propulsive rhythmic drive. On the 6th of July 1976, they made their live debut supporting the Sex Pistols at London's famous 100 Club. Racing ahead of their contemporaries, they signed to Stiff Records and released New Rose in October 1976, earning their place in history as the first British punk rock single. They followed this in February 1977 with Damned, 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 the UK's first official punk studio album produced by Nick Lowe. However, the initial momentum cracked quickly. Their second album, Music for Pleasure in 1977, failed to match the debut's acclaim. Internal tensions over creative direction led to a sudden breakup in early 1978. Bryan James exited, but the remaining members realised they weren't done. They reformed just 6 months later, with Captain Sensible moving to lead guitar and Paul Gray eventually taking over on bass. This reformed lineup unlocked a completely new wave of creativity. Moving away from standard 3-chord garage punk, they began embracing gothic rock, psychedelia and melodic pop. Their 1979 album Machine Gun Etiquette yielded major hits like Love Song and Smash It Up, a track dedicated to their late friend Mark Bolan. By 1980, they released the Black Album, an expansive experimental double LP that featured sprawling arrangements and synthesizers, notably featuring a contribution from a young Hans Zimmer. By 1982, the band had signed a new record deal with Bronze Records. They were preparing material for what would become their 5th studio album, Strawberries. Before that album dropped, they decided to release a completely standalone experimental single. That single was Lovely Money, recorded in early 1982 and co-produced by the band alongside synth-pop producer Tony Mansfield. The track was built around a prominent driving electronic drum beat, heavily leaning into the very synth-pop sound that dominated the airwaves at the time. What elevates the song from a simple pop experiment into a piece of pure satire is its guest star. The Damned recruited Vivian Stanshall, the legendary, eccentric former frontman of the 1960s satirical art rock group, the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. Stanshall delivers a scathing, elitist voiceover throughout the track. Acting as a mock tour guide, he explicitly lampoons foreign tourists, commercial greed, and the burgeoning consumerism of modern London. Crucially, the song also served as a biting piece of political commentary. Recorded against the backdrop of 1982, Stanshall's zany, surreal diatribes directly criticised the wave of intense British nationalism that had risen across the country following the Falklands War. Released on the 18th of June 1982, the single was issued as a 7-inch picture disc and a 12-inch single by Bronze. The B-side featured a disco mix of the A-side, where the mischievous band simply sped up the backing track for alternative club DJs. Despite receiving airplay on the BBC, the single stalled and completely missed the top 40, peaking at 42. Purists were baffled by the electronic dance style, and the mainstream wasn't ready for Stanshall's surreal, politically charged rants. Yet, it remains a vital bridge in their catalogue. Just months later, in October 1982, they released Strawberries, cementing their transition into a highly melodic, unclassifiable force in British rock. Lovely Money proved that even when they were playing with synthesizers, the punk spirit of provocation was completely alive and well. What a crazy start to this playlist. Every now and again, the 80s reveal themselves as a bit mad, but that's no bad thing. I think we can all take music a bit too seriously nowadays. But with the 80s, you can flip from Fame to Postman Pat to John McEnroe in just a few songs. But do join us next week as the second half of Playlist 44 gets a little more serious again, as we plunge deeper into the hot July of 1982. Hot Chocolate release a massive hit. We go on a day trip to the beach with Chaz and Dave before the Bell Stars drop the clapping song. Yazoo get us back on the dance floor before we meet the brilliantly blitzy eccentric group Hazy Fantasy and John Digweed. And we end with some more incredible talk. Until then, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.